The strange thing wasn't the chains. It was how badly the town needed them. The wind carried dust through the streets of Red Hollow like smoke from an old fire nobody wanted to remember. Storefront windows rattled softly beneath the dry October gusts, and somewhere near the stable, a loose sign knocked against wood with a slow hollow rhythm. But nobody looked at the wind. Nobody looked at the sky. Every eye in town was fixed on the Apache woman standing in chains beside the water trough at the center of the square. Her hands were bound in front of her with rusted iron. Her dark hair hung loose across one shoulder, tangled with dust from the road. Someone had torn the sleeve of her faded buckskin dress, exposing bruises around her wrist where the metal bit too hard into skin. Still, she stood straight. Too straight for someone surrounded by 40 angry townsfolk who wanted her gone before sunset. "She brought trouble here," a man near the saloon muttered. "Same as the rest of them." Others nodded because nodding was easier than thinking. A woman pulled her little boy closer when she passed by the prisoner, as though fear could spread through the air like sickness. Sheriff Pike stood beside the trough pretending to keep order, though the sweat darkening his collar told a different story. He was not a cruel man. That was the problem. Cruel men were simple. Weak men let crowds decide who deserved mercy. Then came the sound of hoofbeats climbing the hill into town. Slow. Heavy. Familiar. Several heads turned before the rider even appeared through the dust. The horse came first, tall and gray, carrying a young cowboy with broad shoulders and tired eyes beneath the brim of a weather-stained hat. Cole Mercer had been gone 7 years. 7 years since he rode out of Red Hollow after his father died in the mine collapse north of town. Folks used to say the boy had his father's quiet way of watching people. The kind that made liars uncomfortable. Cole slowed his horse near the general store. Something about the silence felt wrong immediately. Red Hollow was never quiet at noon. Not this quiet. He noticed the crowd first. Then the chains. Then her. The Apache. Woman lifted her eyes toward him for only a second, but something inside that look stopped him cold. It wasn't hatred. Wasn't fear either. It looked more like exhaustion from standing alone too long. Sheriff Pike stepped forward. "Keep riding, Cole." The young cowboy climbed down from the saddle without answering. Boots touched dirt softly. A few men shifted uneasily near the saloon porch. "What happened here?" Cole asked. Nobody answered right away. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Town matter." Cole looked back at the woman. Dust clung to her cheek where someone had thrown dirt earlier. What did she do? Again, silence. Not one person spoke. A baby cried somewhere near the church road before his mother hushed him quickly. The Apache woman finally lifted her chin. "They don't know," she said quietly. Her voice carried across the square smoother than the wind. One of the ranch hands spat near her boots. "We know enough." Cole stared at the crowd for a long moment. Faces he grew up around. Men who once drank coffee beside his father. Women who brought pies during winter storms. None of them could meet his eyes now. And suddenly the whole town felt smaller than he remembered. Smaller. Meaner. "Take the chains off her," Cole said. Sheriff Pike blinked hard. "Boy, don't start this." But Cole never looked away from the woman standing alone in the middle of Red Hollow while an entire town searched for someone to blame. The silence in Red Hollow stretched tighter than barbed wire beneath the afternoon sun. Nobody moved after Cole Mercer spoke. Even the wind seemed to hesitate between the buildings. Sheriff Pike rubbed his jaw slowly, eyes shifting toward the crowd like a man searching for permission he should not have needed. The Apache woman remained still beside the trough, chains hanging from her wrists with a faint metallic rattle whenever the breeze touched them. Cole stepped closer. He could smell dust, horse sweat, and the faint scent of smoke drifting down from somewhere near the church hill. But beneath all that, he smelled fear. Not hers. The town's. Cole, the sheriff said carefully, you have been gone a long time. Things changed. Looks more like. People changed. A few men near the saloon porch muttered under their breath. One rancher crossed his arms. You do not know what she is. The woman finally looked toward the speaker. Her dark eyes carried the tired patience of someone who had heard the same sentence too many times before. Neither do you, she replied quietly. Her voice unsettled them more than anger would have. Calm, frightened, guilty people. Cole stopped an arm's length away from her. The bruises around her wrists looked fresh beneath the iron cuffs. Someone had tied them too tight on purpose. What is your name? He asked. She studied him for a second before answering. Nayeli Redbird. Something shifted near the edge of the crowd. An older woman standing outside the bakery suddenly lowered her eyes at the sound of that name. Cole noticed. Small things mattered. They always had. What is she accused of? He asked again. Sheriff Pike exhaled heavily. A ranch burned south of Miller Creek 3 nights ago. Family lost their home. Folks say they saw Apache tracks nearby. Nayeli let out a quiet breath through her nose. Not laughter. Something sadder. Tracks, she said softly. That is all it takes now. Nobody answered her. A church bell rang once in the distance, hollow and lonely against the dry sky. Cole glanced toward the ridge above town where the old church stood blackened against the horizon. Half the roof had collapsed years ago after a fire nobody liked discussing anymore. As a boy, he remembered hearing whispers about that night. Missing records. Missing people. Then silence. Red Hollow buried its memories deep. Take the chains off, Cole repeated. Sheriff Pike shifted uncomfortably. If I do that, this crowd turns ugly. Maybe it already is. The words landed harder than shouting would have. One man stepped forward angrily, boots scraping dirt. You choosing her over your own town? Cole looked around slowly. Faces everywhere. Hard faces. Nervous faces. Ashamed faces pretending not to be ashamed. I am choosing truth, he said. That used to matter here. The rancher scoffed. Apache truth? Before Cole could answer, Nayeli spoke first. My little brother disappeared near this town. 11 years ago. The square fell strangely quiet again. Even Sheriff Pike looked startled. I came here looking for answers, she continued. That is the only reason I crossed your border. Cole watched the crowd carefully this time. 2 men near the stable looked away too quickly. The older woman outside the bakery nearly dropped the tray in her hands. Fear moved through Red Hollow like cold water beneath a frozen river. Hidden. Fast. Dangerous. Then a young boy no older than 10 came running through the street carrying a bucket of nails for the blacksmith. He slowed when he saw Nayeli. For one brief second, the child looked directly into her eyes. Not with hatred. Recognition. His mother grabbed his arm immediately and pulled him away so hard the bucket tipped sideways, scattering nails across the dirt road with sharp metallic clicks that echoed through the square like tiny warning bells. Cole turned back toward the Apache woman beside the trough and realized something that chilled him worse than winter wind. This town was not afraid of what Nayeli might do. They were afraid of what she might remember. By sundown, the shadows in Red Hollow stretched long enough to hide a man's conscience. The crowd slowly drifted away from the square, but nobody wandered far. People lingered beneath awnings and beside hitching posts pretending to return to normal while keeping one eye fixed on the Apache woman beside the trough and the cowboy standing near her. Fear had changed shape now. Earlier it looked loud. Angry. Certain. Now it looked quiet. Nervous. Watching. Sheriff Wallace Pike finally unlocked the chains with reluctant hands. The iron cuffs fell away with a dull clink against the dry dirt. Nayeli rubbed her wrists once but said nothing. Cole noticed that too. Most people rushed to speak after being humiliated. She carried silence like someone who learned long ago it survived better than pride. "You should leave town tonight," the sheriff muttered under his breath. "Both of you." Cole leaned one shoulder against the trough. "That sounds less like advice and more like fear." Pike glanced toward the blackened church hill before answering. "Some things are better buried." Nayeli looked up sharply at that. The sheriff instantly regretted the words. Cole saw it happen right there across the man's face. Tiny reactions told the truth faster than mouths ever could. A cold gust pushed through town carrying the scent of rain somewhere far west beyond the mesas. Dust curled around boots and wagon wheels while the last sunlight painted the windows gold. Then the bakery door creaked open behind them. The older woman Cole noticed earlier stepped outside holding a folded blanket in trembling hands. She could not have been less than 70. Thin shoulders. Gray hair pinned tightly beneath a faded bonnet. She approached Nayeli carefully, like a woman walking toward a ghost she recognized from another life. "The nights get cold after October," she whispered, offering the blanket forward. Nayeli hesitated before accepting it. Their fingers brushed for half a second. The old woman's eyes filled instantly with tears she did not understand herself. "Mrs. Calloway," Sheriff Pike warned quietly. But the old woman ignored him. "You have your mother's eyes," she said softly. The square went still all over again. Nayeli's expression changed for the first time since Cole arrived. Not fear. Not anger. Shock. "You knew my mother?" she asked. Mrs. Calloway swallowed hard. "Everybody did." One of the ranchers stepped forward immediately. "That is enough." His voice came too fast. Too sharp. Cole turned toward him slowly. "Funny thing," he said, "every time somebody mentions the past around here, another man gets nervous." The rancher glared but did not answer. Mrs. Calloway backed away toward the bakery, suddenly afraid of her own courage. Before disappearing inside, she looked once more at Nayeli. "Do not trust the church hill after dark," she whispered. Then the door shut behind her. Cole felt the entire town tighten around those words. The church hill. Again. Sheriff Pike removed his hat and wiped sweat from his brow though the evening air had turned cold enough for breath to fog faintly. "You should not go digging through old graves, son. Depends who put them there." Nayeli wrapped the blanket around her shoulders against the wind. 11. "Years ago," she said quietly, "my mother brought my little brother here during winter trading season. He vanished near the church. They told her he wandered into the desert alone." Cole looked toward the burned silhouette rising above town. Half the roof collapsed inward like broken ribs against the darkening sky. "And you never believed them?" Nayeli shook her head once. "My brother was 7 years old. He was afraid of the dark. He would never leave her alone." Somewhere down the street, a dog suddenly began barking wildly before going silent just as fast. A lantern flickered near the saloon porch. Then another. Red Hollow seemed to shrink beneath the coming night, every building holding its breath. Cole reached for his horse reins slowly. "Show me the church." Sheriff Pike stepped directly into his path. "Do not do this." Cole stared at the older man for a long second. "You already know what happened up there, do not you?" The sheriff said nothing. But in the fading light, silence finally sounded an awful lot like guilt. The old church waited above Red Hollow like a scar nobody wanted touched. Moonlight spilled across the hill in pale silver streaks as Cole Mercer guided his horse through the narrow trail climbing toward the ruins. Behind him, Nayeli walked quietly wrapped in Mrs. Calloway's blanket, her dark eyes fixed on the broken shape rising against the night sky. The wind grew colder higher up the ridge. Dry grass whispered around their boots. Somewhere far off, a coyote called once before silence swallowed the sound whole. Cole remembered this hill differently as a boy. Back then the church bell rang every Sunday morning across the valley. Families wore clean clothes. Children ran between wagons after service while old men argued about rain and cattle prices. Then came the fire 11 years ago. Afterward, nobody rebuilt. Nobody explained much either. Red Hollow simply stopped speaking about the church the way people stop speaking about a family member who died badly. Sheriff Pike's warning still echoed in Cole's head. Some things are better buried. The closer they came to the ruins, the less he believed that. The front doors hung crooked on rusted hinges, creaking softly whenever the wind pushed through them. Burn marks still stained the stone walls black near the windows. Half the roof had collapsed inward years ago, leaving the skeleton of old beams exposed to the stars overhead. Cole stepped inside first holding a lantern low near his knee. Dust floated through the light like ash suspended in water. Broken pews lay scattered across the floor beneath fallen timber and old soot stains. The place smelled of rain-damp wood and something older underneath. Something forgotten. Nayeli stopped near the entrance. Her eyes moved slowly across the ruined sanctuary. "My mother brought us here once," she whispered. "I remember candles." Cole glanced toward her. "You were here the night of the fire?" She nodded faintly. "Only for a few minutes. My brother wandered outside while my mother traded blankets with the women downstairs." Her voice softened. Then the smoke started. Cole crouched beside a collapsed pew, brushing fingers across the floorboards beneath the dust. Something about the church felt wrong. Too empty. Too carefully abandoned. He lifted the lantern higher. Near the altar, faint scratches marked the wooden floor in long uneven lines, almost hidden beneath years of soot. Drag marks. Old ones. Nayeli noticed them too. Her breathing changed slightly. Someone moved something heavy. Cole followed the scratches toward the back room near the collapsed staircase. The door barely hung on its frame. He pushed it open slowly. The room inside was smaller than expected. Shelves lined one wall filled with rotted hymn books and shattered glass lanterns. A rusted iron cross leaned sideways in the corner beneath fallen plaster. Then Nayeli stopped moving entirely. "There," she whispered. Cole lowered the lantern. Near the floor beneath a layer of dust sat a tiny leather shoe no larger than his palm. Child-sized. Apache beadwork stitched carefully around the edges in faded blue thread. Nayeli dropped to one knee beside it as though afraid touching it might break something inside her. Her fingers trembled softly when she lifted the shoe into the lantern light. "My mother made these," she whispered. "For my brother." The room suddenly felt colder. Cole looked down at the floorboards beneath them. One section near the wall sat slightly uneven compared to the others. Newer nails. Different wood grain. Somebody repaired this spot after the fire. His stomach tightened slowly. Outside, the wind slammed one of the church doors shut with a violent crack that echoed through the ruins like gunfire. Nayeli flinched hard. Cole reached for the crowbar leaning beside the broken shelves without taking his eyes off the floor. "Stand back," he said quietly. The first board came loose with a dry groan of old nails pulling free. Dust exploded upward into the lantern light. Then the second board lifted. Nayeli covered her mouth before a sound could escape her throat. At the bottom of the narrow space beneath the church floor rested the small skeleton of a child wrapped carefully in what remained of a faded Apache blanket. And around the tiny neck hung a silver pendant shaped like a church bell. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The lantern trembled faintly in Cole Mercer's hand, sending shadows crawling across the ruined walls while the tiny silver pendant swayed gently against the child's blanket below the floorboards. Nayeli knelt motionless beside the opening, her eyes fixed on the small skeleton hidden beneath 11 years of silence. The wind outside moved through the broken church windows with a low hollow sound that almost resembled breathing. Cole had seen grief before. Ranch accidents. Funerals during hard winters. Mothers standing beside fresh graves with empty eyes. But this felt different. Quieter. Older somehow. Like sorrow that had been waiting too long in the dark. Nayeli finally reached down with trembling fingers and lifted the pendant carefully from the child's chest. Dust clung to the silver bell shape as it turned in the lantern light. "My mother gave this to him," she whispered. She said bells frightened away bad spirits. Her voice nearly disappeared at the last word. Cole lowered himself slowly beside the opening. What was his name? Nayeli swallowed hard before answering. Dakota. The name settled into the ruined church heavier than the wind outside. Cole studied the small space beneath the floorboards again. The blanket had been wrapped carefully around the child. Not hidden carelessly. Buried deliberately. Someone put him here after the fire. Someone who wanted nobody to find him. This was no accident, Cole said quietly. Nayeli closed her eyes for one brief second. I know. Then came the sound of footsteps outside. Fast. Uneven. Both of them looked up instantly. The church doors creaked open hard against the wind as Sheriff Pike stepped inside breathing heavily from the climb up the hill. His lantern light swept across the ruined sanctuary before freezing on the lifted floorboards. The sheriff's face lost all color. Dear God, he whispered. Cole stood slowly. You knew. Pike removed his hat shakily. Rain clouds gathered outside the broken roof, muting the moonlight overhead until the church felt darker than before. I prayed nobody would ever find him, the sheriff admitted quietly. Nayeli rose to her feet so suddenly the blanket slipped from her shoulders. You left my brother beneath the floor like an animal. Pike looked at her with exhausted eyes. I did not put him there. But you knew. The sheriff could not deny it. Silence answered for him. Cole stepped closer. Then who did? Pike stared toward the ruined altar instead of meeting either of their eyes. The men who built this town, he said softly. Mayor Barrett. Elias Turner from the mine office. Reverend Doyle before he died. Nayeli's breathing grew uneven. Why? Pike rubbed one hand across his face like a man trying to wipe away 11 years at once. Your mother saw something she should not have seen during the fire. The church basement was being used to hide mine contracts. Illegal land deals. Apache families were forced off their land after signing papers they could not read. Cole felt cold settle deep in his chest. And the boy? The sheriff looked toward the opening beneath the floorboards again. He wandered downstairs during the fire smoke. He heard them arguing. Pike's voice cracked slightly. The wrong men panicked. Rain finally began tapping softly against the broken roof beams overhead. Tiny drops drifted through the open ceiling into the ruined sanctuary. Nayeli stared at the sheriff with a pain too deep for tears now. My mother searched for him until the day she died. Pike closed his eyes. I know. Cole suddenly understood why Red Hollow feared her arrival so much. It was never about burned ranches or Apache tracks. The town had spent 11 years building a wall of silence around one terrible night. And now that silence was breaking apart board by board beneath the old church floor. Then Pike looked directly at Cole for the first time since entering the ruins. Fear sat plainly in the old lawman's eyes now. You need to leave before morning, he said. Because once the others learn you found this, his words stopped abruptly as another sound drifted through the storm outside. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders climbing slowly toward the church hill through the rain. The hoofbeats grew louder beneath the storm until the old church itself seemed to tremble with them. Rain slid through the broken roof in silver streaks while Cole Mercer stepped toward the entrance, one hand resting near the revolver at his side without touching it. Sheriff Wallace Pike looked ready to collapse where he stood. Nayeli still held the small silver pendant in her hand so tightly her knuckles had turned pale beneath the lantern glow. Outside, lightning flickered somewhere beyond the mesas, illuminating the ridge for half a second at a time. Then the riders appeared through the rain. 4 men. Dark coats. Wide-brimmed hats dripping water onto their shoulders as they dismounted slowly near the church steps. Cole recognized them immediately. Mayor Barrett climbed the stairs first, his expensive boots splashing through mud that lesser men would have avoided. Beside him came Elias Turner from the mine office, thin as fence wire with nervous eyes that never stayed still long. The last 2 men remained silent near the doorway, hands tucked beneath rain cloaks. Not hired guns exactly. Worse. Men who obeyed without asking questions. Barrett stepped inside the ruined church and stopped when he saw the open floorboards. His expression barely changed. That frightened Cole more than anger would have. "Sheriff," Barrett said calmly, "I told you this hill should stay locked." Wallace Pike lowered his gaze like a man too tired to lie anymore. Rain drummed softly overhead. Nayeli stepped protectively in front of the opening beneath the floorboards. "You buried a child here." Barrett finally looked at her directly. "That was never the plan." The coldness of the answer settled over the church harder than the storm outside. Cole moved slightly closer to Nayeli without thinking about it. Barrett noticed. "You came back to town at the wrong time, son," the mayor said quietly. "This matter does not concern you. A dead child concerns me." Elias Turner suddenly spoke too fast. Nobody meant for any of this to happen. His voice shook beneath the words. The fire spread quicker than expected. People panicked. Nayeli stared at him with eyes that no longer looked tired. Now they looked dangerous. "My mother begged this town for help," she said softly. "You told her my brother wandered into the desert." Turner swallowed hard. "We thought it was Kinder." "Kinder," Cole repeated slowly. The word sounded rotten inside the ruined church. Barrett removed his gloves one finger at a time with unsettling calm. "You are young, Cole. You still believe truth fixes things. Sometimes truth destroys entire towns." Lightning flashed again beyond the broken roof beams. For one brief instant, the mayor's face looked older than the hills themselves. "Red Hollow survives because certain stories stayed buried," he continued. "The mine brought jobs. Families. Roads. Everything you see exists because difficult choices were made." Nayeli stepped forward through the lantern light. "A child is not a difficult choice." Nobody answered her. Outside, more hoofbeats echoed faintly somewhere below the ridge. Barrett heard them too. His expression tightened for the first time. Sheriff Pike slowly lifted his head. "You hear that?" The mayor turned sharply toward him. Pike looked almost relieved now, like a man who had carried guilt so long he no longer feared consequences. "She did not come alone," the sheriff whispered. Rain blew harder through the broken windows as the distant riders approached town from the valley floor below. Not 4 riders this time. Many. Cole walked toward the church entrance and looked down across the dark plains beneath the storm clouds. Tiny lantern lights moved slowly through the rain far below Red Hollow. Dozens of them. Silent. Steady. Nayeli joined him near the doorway, the silver pendant still resting in her palm. "My people know I never returned," she said quietly. Mayor Barrett's confidence finally cracked beneath the sound of approaching horses. "How many?" he asked. Nayeli watched the lights climbing through the darkness without blinking. "Enough." The wind carried the low rhythm of hoofbeats across the valley like distant thunder rolling toward a town that suddenly remembered every lie it ever told. Rain covered Red Hollow before midnight like a curtain trying to hide a guilty face. Water streamed through the empty streets, turning dust into dark mud beneath wagon wheels and porch steps while lanterns flickered weakly behind closed windows. Nobody slept easy that night. The sound of approaching riders had traveled faster than the storm itself. Inside the ruined church, Mayor Barrett stood near the doorway staring down toward the valley lights below with growing unease tightening his jaw. Sheriff Wallace Pike remained beside the open floorboards where the child had been hidden all those years, his shoulders sagging beneath the weight of secrets finally dragged into the open air. Cole Mercer watched every face carefully. That was what his father taught him long ago. Fear always revealed itself around the eyes first. Elias Turner looked ready to collapse entirely. Sweat mixed with rainwater across his pale face as he twisted his hat nervously between shaking hands. "We can still fix this," Turner whispered. Barrett turned slowly toward him. "There is no fixing this anymore." Nayeli stood near the broken altar holding the silver pendant against her palm. The church bell shape glimmered faintly whenever lightning flashed through the collapsed roof overhead. Her expression had changed again. Earlier she looked wounded. Now she looked steady. Like stone shaped by years of surviving storms. "My mother begged this town for mercy," she said. Quietly. "Did any of you answer her?" Sheriff Pike lowered his eyes. Turner said nothing. Barrett stared toward the valley again before finally speaking. "Mercy is expensive when people are afraid." Cole felt anger rise cold and sharp beneath his ribs. "You burned a child into your history because the town feared losing money." Barrett looked directly at him. "You think this place survives on goodness?" The mayor's voice stayed calm, almost tired now. The mine brought food to families during drought years. It kept widows alive after the cattle sickness. Men protect what feeds their children. Nayeli stepped closer through the lantern light. "Even if it costs someone else theirs." The old man had no answer for that. Outside, the hoofbeats continued drawing nearer beneath the storm. Slow. Controlled. Not the sound of an army rushing toward revenge. The sound of people arriving with purpose. Cole moved toward one of the shattered church windows and looked down over the ridge. Riders carrying lanterns stretched across the valley floor below like a river of gold flowing through darkness. Dozens now. Maybe more. Yet no shouting drifted upward. No war cries. Only the steady rhythm of horses moving through rain. Sheriff Pike joined Cole at the window after a long silence. "You know what scares me most?" the sheriff asked quietly. Cole glanced toward him. Pike swallowed hard. "They came peacefully." The word settled heavily inside the ruined church because everyone understood what they meant. Peaceful men still leave room for forgiveness. Guilty towns rarely know what to do with that. Then came another sound beneath the storm. A bell. Faint at first. Then again. Cole turned sharply toward the center of the sanctuary. The old church bell rope still hung near the altar half buried beneath fallen timber. Nayeli stared at it with wide eyes. "Nobody has rung that bell since the fire," Pike whispered. Yet the sound came again. Low. Hollow. Rolling across the hill through rain and darkness. Barrett's face drained pale beneath the lantern glow. Impossible. Cole stepped toward the rope slowly. Water dripped through the broken ceiling onto the floorboards around him. Then he saw it. The rope was moving. Not swinging wildly. Pulling gently. Deliberately. One slow toll at a time. Every man inside the church froze where he stood. Nayeli clutched the silver pendant tighter against her chest as the bell rang once more through the storm. Down below in Red Hollow, doors began opening one by one as frightened townsfolk stepped onto porches listening to a sound they thought had died 11 years ago. Sheriff Pike removed his hat slowly. "Lord help us," he whispered. But Cole Mercer was no longer looking at the bell rope. He was staring toward the church entrance where a small muddy footprint had suddenly appeared on the floorboards beside the open door. The bell continued ringing through the storm long after nobody touched the rope. Slow. Hollow. heavy enough to make every window in Red Hollow tremble beneath the rain. People stepped out onto porches wrapped in blankets and lantern light, staring toward the church hill where the dead silence of 11 years had suddenly come back to life. Inside the ruined sanctuary, nobody moved for several seconds after Cole Mercer spotted the muddy footprint beside the entrance. It was small. Child-sized. Rainwater still glistened around the edges as though whoever left it had stepped there only moments ago. Sheriff Wallace Pike crossed himself quietly beneath his breath. Elias Turner backed away toward the wall, looking close to panic now. "No," he whispered. "No, this is not right." Mayor Barrett remained still, but the calm certainty he carried all evening had finally begun slipping apart beneath the sound of that bell. Nayeli stared at the footprint without fear. Tears stood silently in her eyes for the first time since entering Red Hollow. "Dakota used to follow me everywhere," she said softly. "Even when he was too little to keep up." Another bell toll rolled through the church. Cole turned toward the rope again. Still moving slowly on its own. Not violently. Not unnaturally. Almost gentle. Like someone calling people home after being forgotten too long. Then came a new sound outside beneath the rain. Horses stopping. Dozens of them. Cole stepped toward the broken doorway and looked down across the churchyard. Apache riders filled the muddy hill below in complete silence. Men wrapped in dark blankets sat tall in their saddles beside women carrying lanterns protected beneath leather covers. None held weapons in their hands. No one shouted. No one threatened. They simply waited beneath the storm while rain rolled from horse manes and hat brims into the dirt. At the front stood an older Apache man with silver-braided hair hanging over his shoulders. His horse remained perfectly still despite the thunder overhead. The old rider slowly raised his eyes toward the church entrance where Nayeli stood wrapped in the blanket from Mrs. Calloway. For a moment neither moved. Then the elder bowed his head slightly. Not to the mayor. Not to the sheriff. To her. Nayeli closed her eyes briefly as though the gesture carried years of pain inside it. Mayor Barrett stepped toward the doorway carefully. "You brought an army." The old Apache elder looked at him with tired eyes weathered by decades beneath the desert sun. "No," he answered calmly. "I brought witnesses." The words cut through the rain harder than shouting could have. Behind the elder, more riders slowly arrived along the ridge carrying lanterns that flickered gold against the darkness. Red Hollow had feared revenge all night. Instead, judgment arrived quietly on horseback. Sheriff Pike removed his badge slowly and stared at it in his trembling hands. "We should have told the truth years ago." Barrett's jaw tightened. "And destroyed this town." Pike looked toward the open floorboards where the child still rested beneath the church. Maybe some things deserve to fall apart. Down below in the streets, townsfolk began climbing the hill despite the rain. Ranchers. Shopkeepers. Mothers holding lanterns against the storm. Mrs. Calloway among them with tears running openly down her face now. Nobody spoke as they gathered outside the ruined church, staring first at the Apache riders, then at the broken sanctuary above them. Fear still existed. But something else had arrived beside it. Shame. Cole watched the town carefully as people realized the riders had not come seeking blood. They came seeking truth. That frightened Red Hollow far more. Nayeli stepped out into the rain holding the silver pendant in her palm. Water slid through her dark hair while thunder rolled low across the valley. She looked over the townspeople gathered below and spoke softly enough that everyone strained to hear. "My mother waited outside this church for 3 days after the fire," she said. "She believed somebody inside would tell her where her son was." Rain dripped from porch hats and lantern handles while nobody dared interrupt her. Nayeli's voice remained calm. Steady. "You buried a child beneath your prayers and called yourselves decent people." Not one person argued. Because beneath the storm and the bell and 11 years of silence finally breaking apart, Red Hollow understood something terrible all at once. The Apache woman they chained in the square had never come to destroy the town. She came to force it to remember. Morning arrived quietly over Red Hollow. No thunder remained. No shouting. No horses charging through dust like the stories people used to tell around saloon tables. Only silence. Thin streams of sunlight slipped across the muddy streets where rainwater still pooled beneath wagon wheels and porch steps. The church bell had finally stopped sometime before dawn, but its echo seemed trapped inside every building in town. Folks moved slower that morning. Store owners opened shutters without speaking. Ranch hands kept their eyes lowered while leading horses toward the troughs. Even the dogs wandering the streets barked less than usual, as if they sensed something heavy hanging over the valley. Up on the church hill, the Apache riders still waited in calm silence beside their horses. No weapons drawn. No threat spoken. Just witnesses beneath the pale morning sky. Cole Mercer stood near the ruined church doorway watching townspeople climb the muddy hill one by one. Sheriff Pike had confessed everything before sunrise. Not loudly. Not dramatically. He simply sat on the broken church steps while rain dripped from his hat and told the truth the way exhausted men finally surrender after carrying too much weight alone. About the mine contracts. About the fire. About the frightened men. Who chose silence over mercy after a child disappeared beneath smoke and confusion. Mayor Barrett never argued once the confession started. He only stood staring toward the valley while the years caught up to him all at once. Some people in town cried quietly after hearing the truth. Others walked away unable to look at the church anymore. A few tried blaming fear. Hard times. Panic. But excuses sounded small standing beside the tiny grave beneath the floorboards. Nayeli remained near the church entrance wrapped in the faded blanket Mrs. Calloway had given her. She looked tired now in a way deeper than sleeplessness. Like someone who finally reached the end of a road she never wanted to walk in the first place. The silver pendant rested against her palm while Apache elders carefully carried her brother's remains from beneath the church floor into the morning light. Nobody stopped them. Nobody even breathed loudly. Mrs. Calloway stepped forward through the crowd with trembling hands and placed a small bundle of white flowers beside the child's blanket. "Your mother deserved better from us," the old woman whispered through tears. Nayeli studied her quietly for a long moment before nodding once. Forgiveness did not appear in her eyes. But neither did hatred. Sometimes pain grows too old for either. Cole watched the town carefully as people lowered their heads one after another while the Apache riders prepared to leave. No speeches came. No grand apologies. Out here, shame rarely knew how to speak. Mayor Barrett finally approached Nayeli near the church steps. The proud man looked smaller somehow beneath the morning sun. Older too. "I thought protecting this town mattered more than truth," he admitted quietly. Nayeli looked past him toward the streets below where children now stood silently beside parents who suddenly seemed unsure what lessons they had been teaching all these years. "A town built on silence is already falling apart," she said softly. Barrett lowered his eyes because he knew she was right. A few minutes later, the Apache riders mounted their horses beneath the cold morning wind. The elder with silver braids nodded once toward Cole before turning his horse toward the open valley. Nayeli stepped toward Cole last. For a second neither spoke. Dust drifted softly between them beneath the pale sky. Then she placed the silver bell pendant into his hand. "Why me?" Cole asked quietly. Nayeli looked back toward Red Hollow one final time. "Because you stayed when the others wanted silence." Her horse turned slowly toward the valley where her people waited below the hill. Cole stood there watching her ride away beneath the endless western sky until the riders became shadows against the distant mesas. Behind him, Red Hollow remained completely silent.